All right. So again, welcome to the next installment of the 2022-2023 Social Justice Leadership Series, which is this one today is a conscious coffee hour. So one time a month, we have a conscious coffee hour. So it's to raise awareness around different relevant topics related to social justice. The last conscious coffee hour we had was blackface and cultural appropriation. This one is, and we have a second one that we have each month celebrating one of the cultural heritage. So our last Social Justice Leadership Series for fall 2022 will be held on Monday, November 28th in AIC 125 at 4:30 to 5:30. And it's going to be a conversation with the Kickapoo tribe around their history and cultures in celebration of Indigenous Peoples Heritage Month. And so today our conversation is the environmental impacts on communities of color. And I am very happy to have Trisha Cortez, who's the Executive Director of the Rio Grande International Study Center. Yeah, I always get the I a little bit, but I know Trisha in other aspects, but they have done phenomenal jobs. In fact, Trisha has served as a speaker for the International Leadership Series in the past. As it related to border and the border wall and the No Border Wall Coalition. And so speaking today about some of the environmental impacts that we have here in Laredo and how, as a community of color, we tend to, and other communities of color tend to have some more of the adverse effects of health related to other environmental aspects. Not just here in Laredo, but elsewhere throughout the country. And so I'm extremely excited to do that. And I'm going to go get a clicker for you. So let's give her a best of a welcome.
Yay. I'm excited to be here. And so let's just get started. I go quickly. I've got a lot of images. If you have a burning, pressing question, raise your hand or write it down. So this is like a safe space. We're here to learn and learn from each other. So I think I need a clicker here. How do I advance? Let me see here. Oh, there we go. Okay, so who are we? Raise your hand if you have never heard of our organization, and don't be shy to say that you haven't. Okay, most of y'all, this is great. That's why I'm glad to be here. Now you know us. We are the only environmental nonprofit in this city. And so if you care about environmental issues, please consider joining us. We are a community-centered organization. Thank you. We are 28, almost 29 years old, and these are the main issues that we work on: water security, river restoration, climate justice, clean air, and building community power. So let's just get right down to it, right? We're talking about justice issues, right? So who are we, right? I'm sure y'all know this, but just a little refresher. So our community is 95% Latinx. We are the most Latino community in the United States. That's crazy, right? 24% of our people live in poverty. That's more than twice the average for the state of Texas. It's very high. At the same time, we are the largest inland port in the United States. We move so much trade and commerce through the country, and this creates huge wealth disparities, right, in our community. We're proudly bilingual, proudly bicultural, and we're a historic community. We're older than the United States of America. You know, this city was founded in 1755. And when you get right down to it, you may not think about it because we're 95% Latino and you don't always see it. But there is systemic racism that happens in this community, mainly by people from the outside wanting to make decisions for us. Right, so it contributes to how we're treated by government authorities at all levels and industry. The border is often used as a stage for political grandstanding or to generate enormous profit, regardless of the impacts of the people who live here and don't have a decision in those, don't have a say in those decisions. That is a justice issue. Many of our families here in South Texas and on the border carry the collective memory of struggle that includes violence, exploitation, murder, theft of land, and disenfranchisement by those in power. Can never forget that. So, what is environmental justice? Raise your hand if you already know what this is, and raise your hand if you'd like a little refresher. about what environmental justice is. Okay. Environmental justice, just like any other justice issue, social justice, racial justice, climate justice, these justice issues, I highlighted in bold what makes it a justice issue. You want fair treatment of people regardless of who they are or what their background is, with respect to the implementation or creation of laws, regulations, and policies. And those people, especially who are going to be impacted, are involved, are at the table in the decision-making process by the government. And we got a lot of work to do on that in Laredo still, and many other places as well. So I wanted to play this. It's a 3-minute video. If it doesn't play, no big deal. And it looks like it's probably not going to play, which is okay. I think it's, all right. And I'm sorry, I like ran down the parking lot and up the stairs. I'm still catching my breath.
It is because.
And you know, Dr. Hudson, it's okay if it doesn't play, it's okay.
Okay.
Now you got it to play. Yes.
Nationally, the facilities where we dump our garbage and process dangerous chemicals tend to be located in poor and minority communities. The people who live there have little or no protection from the industries around them, and things could get worse. So there's this idea of environmental justice. It's pretty simple. Communities shouldn't be forced to deal with more pollution because they belong to a certain race, national origin, or income bracket. Yet America has struggled over the years to implement any serious policy that actually protects these communities. So let's lay out the ways the government has failed them.
We will not allow Warren County to become a dump site.
The fight for environmental justice took off in 1982, when residents of Warren County, North Carolina mounted mass demonstrations against a plan to dump contaminated soil in a landfill in their community. The EPA investigated 4 similar landfills in southern states and found that they were all located in Black or low-income neighborhoods. In 1987, the United Church of Christ Racial Justice Commission found that around the country, hazardous waste facilities were more likely to be located in mostly minority communities. Amid mounting proof, the federal government was forced to act.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush.
So in 1992, President George H.W. Bush founded the Office of Environmental Justice inside the EPA. 2 years later, President Bill Clinton signed an executive order requiring federal agencies to consider environmental justice in all of their policies, as well as extending civil rights protection to environmental discrimination. But Congress never passed a bill to make Clinton's executive order law. Then came George W. Bush. His administration shifted the focus of the Office of Environmental Justice from protecting low-income and minority communities to all people, leaving vulnerable populations without a federal environmental advocate.
80% of New Orleans, including much of downtown, is underwater.
Under Bush, many environmental civil rights claims were rejected or delayed for years. In 2009, after President Barack Obama's election, his administration recommitted to environmental justice.
Generally speaking, in this country, a lot of environmentally problematic facilities tend to be located in places where poor folks live.
Yet, during the 2 years Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House, they didn't file a single bill focused on strengthening environmental justice protections. Passing major environmental legislation faded further when Republicans took control of Congress in the 2010 midterm elections. Now, President Donald J. Trump is making good on his vow to weaken the EPA.
Environmental protection, what they do is a disgrace. Every week they come out with new regulations. They're making it impossible.
Who's going to protect the environment?
We'll be fine with the environment. We can leave a little bit.
This budget, a 31% cut to the EPA, $2.6 billion cut away from the EPA. That's what the president wants.
As the EPA loses funding and regulations are rolled back, vulnerable communities may very likely fall through the cracks. I'm Talia Buford. I'll be covering these communities and digging into systemic environmental injustice. If you have something to tell me, email me at talia.buford@propublica.org.
All right, so y'all got a little bit of a better sense of EJ, its history, and what it really means. All right, to continue here, just very quickly, I took a few slides from Professor Haley Kazin. Do y'all know Dr. Kazin here at TAMU? All right, so she gets into like, what is marginalization, right? You hear this sometimes in Laredo or other places or in this space. And so it's treatment of a person or a group of people as insignificant, right? People who don't receive the full benefits of a society. And so what are some examples of marginalized groups? You know, she's going to give you a few examples and we're going to think about it. And then this notion of intersectionality, when somebody is a member of various different marginalized groups. So what does that look like in Laredo? Hispanics, non-English speakers, immigrants, low-income people, kids, elderly. These are just some examples. And so again, to recap, lower income folks normally live in the most vulnerable locations in the country and have less developed infrastructure. And given their level of exposure, disadvantaged groups, there is an increased level of susceptibility to damages caused by environmental pollution and nowadays climate hazards. And it's harder for these groups to recover and cope from things like this, oftentimes because they just have fewer resources to begin with. So we're going to talk about two issues today just to highlight why these are environmental justice issues in Laredo. One's the border wall. Raise your hand if you kind of followed the border wall issue a little bit. Raise your hand if you did not. Did not. All right. And then ethylene oxide by a commercial sterilizer in this community. These carcinogenic, cancer-causing emissions. Raise your hand if you don't know what I'm talking about. Great. We're going to learn a lot today. So the border wall, this is why it was an EJ issue, right? You're talking about the confiscation of land owned by people and families and places like the city for people like you and me to enjoy. And it was about removing public access or even access by those families to the river and the River Vega forever. It was about destruction of our land, impacts to our only source of drinking water, which is what's our only source of drinking water? The Rio Grande, right? 100% of every single drop of water in this community comes from that one endangered river. And there was no protection under the law to fight this massive infrastructure project because the government under the previous administration said, we're going to waive all these laws, Clean Water Act. There were 27 laws that they waived for Laredo specifically, meaning this doesn't happen anywhere else in the United States, only on the border to rush construction of the border wall. It's un-American. And so we all knew the wall was not a policy solution to adequately address migration or drug problems. What was it for? Why was this a justice issue? Because it was for political gain to win an election by someone and people who do not live here. When you asked all of these landowners, we have one here, riverfront landowner, hey, can we go ahead and take your land and just destroy it and remove access to your family, your wildlife, your horses, your cattle forever? Is that okay? All the landowners here overwhelmingly said no, but they didn't have a say in the matter. And then we're going to talk about ethylene oxide. We're talking about the poisoning of our air by a private company based in Missouri. It is one of the highest ETO emitting facilities in the country. ETO is an extremely dangerous air toxic that is toxic in ultra low amounts. We're talking 11 parts per trillion. To give you perspective, 1 part per trillion is a drop of water in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. That's how dangerous this chemical is that they are emitting in Laredo by the thousands of pounds every year. And these impacted neighborhoods, businesses, and schools will, guess what? Completely unaware. And it's for what? to generate profit for a private company owned by people who don't live here. So I'm gonna fly through a lot of this just to give you some background about the border wall. A lot of you raised your hands and said you didn't really follow this issue. There were a lot of people, this one issue energized this community in a way that it never had. This community found its voice. So the wall, right? When did it really, really get real for Laredo? It was on this date when President Trump declared a national emergency on the entire southern border, meaning in Laredo. And we were like, what? What does that mean? I wasn't scared to go walk around or even downtown on the river. I'm sure you weren't scared to like just live your daily life. It was not part of our lived reality. So we quickly came to learn what this declaration was. It meant destruction and some big money for some very favored contractors. So the feds awarded 4 contracts worth more than $1 billion to confiscate and destroy 71 river miles in Webb and Zapata counties. To give you some perspective, right? The wall was going to be this 30-foot tall steel structure, and that was just the cherry on top. What the wall meant was they were going to take and clear like a 4 to 6 lane highway amount of land off the river, all of Webb County, which is the 6th largest county geographically in the state of Texas. Is big, and most of Zapata, to create a security enforcement zone, SEZ, that would be off limits to people except them, right? And the little cherry on top was then the steel wall. And this is how it's going to make neighborhoods look, like in West Laredo, El Cuatro, Father McNaboe Park. I don't know, have any of y'all ever been to Father McNaboe Park? Right, it's lovely, and your park would have looked like that from now on. And this is what our group heard all the time, even by people in positions of power, elected officials in Laredo. Not all of them, but just a few. Well, we can't make Trump mad, and we can't antagonize the federal government. And the mayor would tell us over and over, don't poke the bear. Don't poke the bear, because if you get the bear mad, they're not going to give Laredo federal money. You know, crazy stuff, right? The money's already there. Why are you fighting this? And the one thing we heard 1,000 times, this is a done deal. And they told us this 1,000 times. And all I can tell you is that they underestimated Laredo. So we didn't agonize. We didn't go cry and wring our hands in despair. Maybe one day we did, but then the next day we mobilized. And so we had to build a coalition, and it's not easy, and it failed the first time. And so we did it again, and it worked. And our strategy was delay the construction of the wall with every single tool that we could get in our hands on. And then if there was going to be a change in administration, work like hell to cancel the wall project. So our organization became the lead plaintiff in a national lawsuit, and our coalition was very diverse. It wasn't just tree huggers. It was Republicans. It was even some Trumpers. It was landowners, veterans, lawyers, indigenous groups, artists, young students, and we didn't stop. And I'm just going to fly through here. We had so many events. We brought in raise your hand if you've ever heard of Standing Rock. It's where these indigenous groups of people, they took a stand for their land to not build an oil pipeline underneath their only source of drinking water. Well, they came in, we had marches, they taught us a lot. You know, we did this on the river when Nancy Pelosi and all these officials were having the abrazo ceremony on Bridge 2, you know, for WBCA, and stayed there so they could see us. You know, this was the time of COVID. At that time, you couldn't have more than 10 people together. And so we filed lawsuits in federal court. And this lawsuit that was filed during the middle of COVID, a lot of people said, well, I can't be there, but why don't you take my boots? Why don't you take my chanclas? And so that's what we did. And we tried to get to the landowners to tell them, don't sign the right of entry documents that the feds want you to sign to start the confiscation process. Talk and work with one of our lawyers. So we worked on this, and then I think power shifted in this community when we did this. We did this massive street mural. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. And raise your hand if you do not know what I'm talking about, and it's okay. All right. Downtown, in front of the federal courthouse on the street called Victoria, and it runs right past City Hall and the county commissioner's courthouse, you know, through all these like centers of power in our community. A place like Laredo that was so conservative that you just couldn't shake things up. Well, we worked to do this. George Floyd had just been killed in Minneapolis, right? The Black Lives Matter movement exploded. Millions and millions of people marched in the US and around the world. And so we got in touch with a couple of chapters and said, we want to do this too in Laredo. Is that okay? You know, we didn't want to just appropriate something from them. And we got like, okay, from 2 of their chapters. So we did it. We wanted to say defund the wall because it was going to be how much? The feds wanted to drop and blow $1 billion in taxpayer money to destroy so much land, to take it away from us. And that was not going to fix anything. And we said, take that money instead and fund our future. We have so many other needs. And so this is what it looked like in the end. We became a national story. This got hundreds of thousands of hits. And it was a lot of people of all ages. And then, you know, it angered certain groups of people that came to Laredo that wanted to come deface and mess up our street mural. And this was like a month later or 2 months later, but we beat them to the punch and they had to reroute their little vehicle train and were not able to destroy our street mural. And then we had a 2,000-mile concert with Grammy Award-winning artists that supported our movement. And we became the center of a Showtime documentary, Bad Hombres, like our Laredo group. And raise your hand if you know Sister Rosemary in Laredo, right? She's a nun, part of the Sisters of Mercy. They do so much work for battered women, for low-income communities. They have a clinic. And so she like said it perfectly. Like, this gets to the heart of justice movements, right? How are you going to spend $1 billion in Laredo? Man, do we need that money? She's like, you know what? We need jobs. We need better infrastructure. We need better housing. We need to restore this river, better healthcare. We do not need a border wall. So anyway, long story short, these movements, you need little victories to keep the momentum going, right? And we did. Laredo was the only border community from San Diego to Brownsville that was able to get its border wall contracts canceled when the new administration came into power. The first 2 contracts got canceled last July, the next 2 in October. And then these are all the kinds of places that we saved. And the huge one was Secretary Mayorkas canceled that $1 billion that was hanging over our head like a big black thundercloud, and he got rid of that money for Laredo. So any questions on the border wall before we fly here into ethylene oxide? Not yet? All right. So here's the problem, is that Laredoans are at significant risk of developing cancer from ethylene oxide, a carcinogenic air toxin. And we didn't even know until last year about this company and how significant these emissions are in our community. So this place is located, y'all know the Mines Road, right? The Mines Road by I-35. It's in an industrial park called the Killam Industrial Park. That's where they have their business. They've been open since 2005. And that makes them how old? Who's good at math? Quick little calculation in your head. 17 years old, right? And so, you know, the science on ethylene oxide, it's been evolving. They've known for decades that it is very harmful, that it's cancer causing, but they've had tons and tons of studies. And so it wasn't official until 5 years ago in 2016 that it was formally classified as a class 1 carcinogen, right? And it was based on a peer reviewed by a lot of scientists to confirm that. So what in the world is ethylene oxide? Well, it's colorless, odorless, highly flammable, extremely small and unstable that can penetrate pretty much anything. It's derived primarily from fracked natural gas. In Laredo, it's used to sterilize medical equipment. In other parts of the country, it's used to produce the tsunami of single-use plastics. And why is it such an effective sterilizer that also makes it so dangerous? Because it's mutagenic. And what that means is that this molecule, it goes into your cells, and changes things up. It changes up the DNA in a cell, and it causes long-term high exposure, causes cancers of the white blood cell, right? And in 2016, I think this is what was startling, is that the EPA said, you know what? ETO is 60 times more toxic to kids than we previously estimated, because their bodies are developing their little organs, right? And they can't get rid of toxins fast enough. And it's 30 times more toxic to adults. The EPA regulates close to 200 air toxins, right? This one is the most toxic that contributes to the majority of excess cancer risk by industrial air pollution. So just to give you an idea of how much we're talking about. So, and this, by the way, is self-reported by the company, right? This isn't like some government agency going in to test. This is just companies reporting data on a sheet of paper, right? And so look at this. This is significant because there are some states like Illinois and a few others that have said, you know what? We can't even allow 150 pounds to be emitted per year. And we're talking here thousands and thousands of pounds after they knew in 2016, this is a class 1 carcinogen, 60 times more toxic to kids. What did they do? Well, they didn't go down, right? Not at all. And then we formed and they started lowering these numbers. That's not verified. So our organization helped co-found the Clean Air Laredo Coalition. I hope you join it because we need you to hold this company accountable. So this is a map that comes from the EPA website, and it's a cancer risk map. That's where Midwest is located. Here's Tammy U. And what this shows, it shows cancer risk levels due to industrial air pollution. These red census tracts, that tells us that, thank you, that people who live in that area are 95 to 100% times more prone and more at risk of developing cancer from industrial air pollution than other places in the United States. And here's the 90 to 95% and 80 to 90%. And ETO doesn't stop at like boundaries, right? It just looks like this because they're census tracts. So this is 2019 data, just to show you, there are about 100 ethylene oxide emitting facilities in the United States. And we always have ranked in the top 3 to 5 in the country. This community, pretty affluent and white, right outside of Chicago, Willowbrook, also close to a heavy diesel truck corridor like Laredo. This is how much Sterigenics was producing, and they got this plant closed because those people mobilized because of the cancer level risks. And that plant had been open longer, and there were already cancer clusters established. And Laredo, just to give you a comparison, And so one of the more saddening parts of this is actually it's 17, it's not 10. There are 17 Laredo schools that rank in the top 1% of all campuses in the United States. Elementary, middle school, high school, collegiate, public, private, charter, that rank in the top 1% of most air toxic, and it's generated by the ethylene oxide. These are those schools. Can you raise your hand if you went to any of these campuses? Muller, Baskin, United Day, Kazin, Findlay, Washington Middle, Matias de Llano, Herrera, Troutman, Malakoff, Mary Help, Charles Borchers, United Middle. So this means they're in the top 1% nationally for chronic health risk from air pollution generated specifically by ethylene oxide. Muller has an air toxic concentration 227 times the national average. And there's only 15 other schools in the entire United States with a worse air toxic ranking than Muller Elementary. There are 98 schools identified in Laredo by this study from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And 94 of them, and Tammy Yu, I think, ranks in the top 3 percentile, but 94 rank in the top 6%. And this one, when I started digging into the databases last summer, this one really hit me because I've got 2 little kids that go to their second grader and first grader that go to school in this area. And I thought, how many parents don't even know? How many teachers, administrators, and they don't know, and they're having to do this every day. And you know, ETO doesn't just say, I'm gonna go hang out at a school, right? It's like the whole neighborhood. You know, we saw that map. And so this one really, this one hit very, very close to home for me. And one of the last slides that I have here, so we can open it up. We formed the Clean Air Laredo Coalition last year, trying to get a better understanding of this chemical and what is it that we could do in Laredo, because the border wall taught us ain't nothing a done deal. And it also taught us nobody's gonna come and save you. And it taught us, okay, fine, you can go cry and despair for a little bit, then you gotta come back and you gotta mobilize and organize, and you gotta pressure to change things, right? And so we formed the Clean Air Laredo Coalition of regular, normal, everyday people, but we got the governments involved. The city formally is involved, Webb County, UISD, tomorrow LISD boats. And we're creating a new fence line air monitoring program because it doesn't exist. Midwest won't do it. The state of Texas hasn't done it. And so pressure from the city through the coalition forced the Texas Department of State Health Services. They just finished 2 new cancer cluster studies in Laredo. The first one got done in the summer. I can't remember the month, I think it was July. And they looked at 3 census tracts, the one that Midwest is in and 2 adjacent ones. And then they just finished a couple of weeks ago in October, a second cancer cluster study for the next 3 census tracts. And what they discovered is that in Laredo, in and around Midwest, we have statistically higher incidence rates of cancer. The same kinds of cancers that the EPA has associated with high exposure to ethylene oxide compared to the rest of the entire state. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, acute leukemia, and breast cancer. This is not theoretical, this isn't political, these are facts. And this is a real life public health crisis in our community. And so I want to leave you with this, because sometimes doing this work can be hard and it can make you feel hopeless sometimes, unless you've got a coalition or you've got some badass students like this who care and are going to get involved for their community And these are three quotes that I think of often. And Margaret Mead, an anthropologist, said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Dolores Huerta, an icon in the Chicano civil rights movement, said, "Every moment's an organizing opportunity. Every person, each of you, because you wouldn't be here right now in this series if you didn't feel something inside of you, right? Every person's a potential activist and every minute a chance to change the world." And then one of the, just such a brave African-American civil rights activist, you know, she's the one who said, "Don't agonize, like organize." And so I want to leave you with this. And also, I think of this other one, and I didn't put it there. And so it's this beautiful African proverb, right? And I think about it often because it took me a long time to get it and believe it and practice it. And it says, "If you want to go fast, go solo. And if you want to go far, go together." And so we have to join forces in order to create needed change, because change is possible. Don't ever let anybody tell you, "Well, that's just how it is. Oh, we can't go poke the bear. You know, this is a done deal," right? Or "I can't like make waves." It's just not how it is. And we've learned that, we've lived that. And so that's what I wanted to leave y'all with. And I don't know if y'all have questions. I think we've got like 5 or 10 minutes worth of questions. If anybody has any, please let me know. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Dealing with the ethylene oxide, I remember when I first learned about it and, you know, explained the issue to my family, they were like, "Okay, well, what can we do if we shut down this company that does sterilize medical equipment? Like, how else are we going to sterilize medical equipment? So are there any other alternatives that we can explain to people?"
It's a great question. And yes, a lot of the medical devices that they sterilize don't need to be sterilized with ethylene oxide. It's just something that sort of has become more standard. And interestingly, the byproduct that they create in a place like Midwest is ethylene glycol, and that's shipped off to poor brown and black communities on the Gulf Coast or in the South to go make single-use plastics as well, right? It's all part of this like petrochem little octopus, right? And so, no, ethylene oxide is there are other ways to do it. And the EPA is about to announce a new rule under the Clean Air Act for commercial sterilizers on ethylene oxide. And there's going to be like a 60 to 90-day commenting period by the public. And this is when everybody needs to like just slam with comments. And so things can change by one of two ways, often by government regulatory issues, but then people pressure, right? Because we're not against business. We want economic development. We want people to have jobs in this community, but we need these to be safe jobs that aren't gonna sacrifice and put at risk so many people, especially so many young kids, at jeopardy in order to use this easier process that's generating a ton of profits for some faraway company, you know. But it is a good question. So I would say join the Clean Air Laredo Coalition. We'll need you for comments, but we'll also need you because the city also has certain powers where they can demand things of companies, and they just haven't because this is so new, right? This all just came out onto the radar screen like a year ago. So the city's trying to get a better handle on this and understand this as well. It's a good question. Anybody else have a question on the wall? And even if you don't agree, it's okay, right? Even if you don't agree or you feel a certain way, and that's totally all right. But does anybody have any question on the wall or on this issue? And these are just two, right? There's other justice issues in Laredo. Yes, sir.
Is the Rio Grande really our only spot of clean water? I've used to live by the river and I saw way too much trash and dumping. This was a long time ago, but when during the flood, I saw a body of someone that went under. I never considered the real clean after seeing stuff like that. Or is there not other places that we've been using the water?
It's a good question. So the river always has been and still is our only source of drinking water. It's been neglected for a long time and mismanaged and not prioritized and not invested in. And so it's deteriorated to where it still ranks as one of the 10 most endangered rivers in the world. Not in Texas or the United States, but like on the planet. And we need like 100% of it. And the number one reason why it's so endangered is because there's not enough water to meet demands. And there's now stretches of the river that are, dry. We're entering into an era of climate-induced drought and extreme heat. And we don't know exactly what those impacts are going to be onto the river. But if we don't plan now in Laredo to figure out how we're going to restore the river and preserve, not just preserve and conserve, but to like increase water supply, this is going to be problematic for y'all and your kids and your grandkids. And so we have to act now. The other issue that he brings up is water quality, and the river suffers from water quality. We do monthly river monitoring, our organization does, and we helped start a river monitoring program through the state and feds in the early 90s. And the river's big. Anybody know where the river starts? Yes, right on, ding, 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 Colorado, the Rocky Mountains of southern Colorado. And so different stretches of the river have their own problems, right? They and Taos, they suffer with this, Albuquerque, El Paso, Matamoros, Laredo, Nuevo Laredo. Our problem with water quality is very, very high bacteria, E. coli and fecal coliform, because you have an incredibly high volume of raw sewage entering into the river from the Nuevo Laredo side. They're working on it. They're going to invest $72 million to fix their colectores for wastewater. They're in the process of doing that. And that would be marvelous, right? Once that happens. And then there's other problems with heavy metals as well here and there in the river. So to answer his question, we have problems with bacteria, right? That needs to be addressed. The US Clean Water Act, which came into being along with the Clean Air Act in the 70s, it makes this promise to the American people and every American community. And it says, we want to make every river a swimmable, fishable river. And that's what we want here. And that's what we're working toward. So I really hope y'all join our org. We've got a lot of volunteer opportunities. We do a lot of outdoor adventure stuff, paddles on the river, and you don't need experience. We have all the kayaks or hikes, cleanups. We do stuff like that. And then we work on advocacy campaigns. Ethylene oxide is one of them right now. But what our organization really seeks to do, it's very easy to talk about problems, right? I mean, you can talk problems all day, right? But what we're after is trying to do the research and investigations to figure out solutions to these problems. For ethylene oxide, it's creating a fence line monitoring plan. It's trying to get money from these different governments or agencies so that we can set up air monitoring canisters and stations to tell us what's really happening with emissions data compared to what the company is self-reporting, right? That's what we're trying to do. On the water side, we're trying to pilot these really innovative infrastructure projects. Our organization's trying to do that right now to restore hydrology and create alternative energy that doesn't come from fossil fuels. And so we're really trying to study and trying to get solutions enacted and in place, Does anybody else have any other questions? Well, I'm excited because after today, after 1 hour, all of y'all know about risk. That's what we go by. The G might be silent, but we are not. And so you know now there's an organization that was created for you and for our future. And there's opportunities for you to get involved. And also check out the Clean Air Laredo Coalition as well. I don't know if there's anything else. So
Thank you so much.
all right.
I have the gas. Oh, okay, cool. I had to take off. Okay. Do I stop recording? Yes. Oh, here it is. Stop.